Keir Starmer has been giving interviews about Labour's stance on the energy price hike, and a couple of clips have caused controversy online. The first was on BBC Breakfast.
Would you make it illegal for someone's energy to be cut off? And you'll clarify for me whether that's the case at the moment. What happens when the money runs out? Someone who has a disability, someone who's in poverty, what happens then? And would you seek some kind of government measure, an extreme measure, something we haven't seen before, to help those people?
Well, firstly, isn't it shocking we're even having this discussion in 21st century Britain after 12 years of a Tory government, that we're talking about a situation where people might have their energy cut off because they simply can't afford to pay for it?
What would you do to preclude that?
The first thing I'd do is exactly what I've described, which is to enable those that most need it to have the £600 towards their energy bills that they desperately need at the moment. That would mean that very few people would be in the position of not being able to pay for their energy. So you're putting to me, quite rightly, I understand it, a challenge, which is assuming the government is as pathetic as it is and doesn't do anything, we're going to have people in this awful position. What would we do? First answer is I wouldn't put them in that awful position in the first place. But the fact that we're even talking about people having their energy cut off...
Well, my impression is you don't have an answer for that question, because what you've said is they shouldn't be in that position. I'm giving you... There are people who'll be watching this programme this morning who may well be thinking, by the end of this month, I genuinely don't think I can pay my bill. And it may be in 3 months' time or after October when the prices go up again. And you say they should be turned to government. I'm asking you, as the leader of the Labour Party, what is the end game? How can they be helped? I'm not looking backwards. I'm looking to what happens on that day.
No, I'm not looking backwards either. I'm saying what we would do, first and foremost, is not put people in that position.
You said that before.
Well, I know, but it's very, very important. People are going to be in that awful position because the government is doing nothing. If the government tomorrow adopted our scheme and reduced and was able to use that windfall tax to help people with their bills by £600, people wouldn't be put in that awful position. I think that is a very important answer to your question.
Later in a Sky interview, Starmer was asked if Labour's policies were radical enough. Starmer responded with this.
What I want people to do is to look at the Labour Party and see a party that understands their worries, that takes them seriously and is prepared to put practical plans on the table. People don't want a revolution. They do want to know, how am I going to pay my energy bill, which has just gone up today by hundreds of pounds? We're putting a practical plan on the table that says, for those that need it most, you ask oil and gas companies who have made more profit than they were expecting to make because of the high global prices. We say, ask those companies to pay their fair share, and that would reduce those bills by £600. So when I'm talking to pensioners, I was in Stevenage last week talking to pensioners, they weren't saying, Keir, we want a revolution. They were saying, Keir, we're really worried about our bill. One of the pensioners said to me that they keep their heating on 12 degrees because they think if they put it higher than that, they can't afford the bill. And this, people having to make a choice between heating and eating. I mean, in 21st century Britain, what people want to know is the Labour Party, does it understand those worries? And the answer to that is yes, we do. Have we got a practical solution to put on the table to reduce those bills by up to £600? Yes, we have.
Did I tell you I was in Stevenage last week talking to pensioners? Should I mention it again?
Even if you're a supporter of Starmer, which I think people should probably be aware of by now that I'm not, it's not good. The presentation's not good. He comes across, particularly in the first interview, as a bullshit artist. He's not on top of his brief. He does this thing where you're a politician and yet you talk like a pundit. Isn't it interesting that in 21st century, look, nobody gives a about your punditry or your commentary. There are social problems confronting all of us. You're a politician. What are you going to do about them? Don't tell us what to think. Don't tell us, isn't it remarkable or isn't it terrible? Look, let other people do that. You're not a pundit. You're the leader of the opposition. You want to be the prime minister. And for all the criticisms thrown at Jeremy Corbyn, he never did this thing of, I'm a pundit. And maybe, hey, you know what? Maybe that was bad. Maybe he should have done things like comment on Chris Rock being slapped like Will Smith. But generally, he stuck to policy because actually that's the stuff that's going to get us out of this mess. And that's the job of a politician. So I didn't like him sort of posing as the pundit. I don't think the policy substantively is very serious. I know there's some disagreement between us on this, Michael. I think, if your energy bill is just tripled or doubled and you're going to be paying thousands of pounds more over the course of a year, up to £600 saving, it's something, but it's clearly massively inadequate. And that's just energy, right? And we're not talking about food. We're not talking about the minimum wage. Right now, as of today, the minimum wage is £9.50. Labour's saying it should be £10. The Tories are saying it'll be £10.50 by the next general election. Now, if Labour is saying it should be £10 this time next year, guess what? If inflation is even 6.5%, that means the real value of the minimum wage is falling. And it just shows that the Labour Party hasn't done proper hard thinking about pay, about public service, about bills. And instead we get stuff like, well, we don't want to have a revolution. Keir Starmer is still talking about Jeremy Corbyn, Michael. He's still, I don't care. And I like Jeremy Corbyn. I don't care. But I think he really let the cat out of the bag by saying, the people of this country don't want a revolution, because to the Westminster establishment, including Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, actually solving problems on a long-term basis for them now feels like a revolution. Because if you're not going to carry on with business as usual with shareholder capitalism and privatization and outsourcing, anything different to that, even if it's like France, where, by the way, they're going to see energy prices go up 4% because the state owns a significant share of EDF, the energy company. Even something like France, the British political establishment feels like a revolution. We can't have a revolution. Well, ergo, it means we can't solve any problems. Sorry. This year we'll do this one-off thing where we'll save up to £600. Great. Well, hold on. My energy bills have just gone up £2,500. And food inflation is 10%. Okay, I'll save £600 on energy bills. And yes, of course, it's better than nothing. But people are looking at that in the context of what the government's doing. Let's look at it in the context of what the German government's doing or the French government's doing. This isn't a Labour Party or a Labour leader serious about solving problems. That's what politicians are meant to do, not give commentary about Chris Rock being slapped or about whether OAPs and Kettering want a revolution.
I think kind of where I differ is I think you're being a little bit unfair when you say he was just offering commentary in that first interview, because to be honest, I thought him pushing back against the interviewer was kind of reasonable there, because he was asked, what would you do about this? Would you stop people turning off people's electricity or gas if they can't pay? He said, we shouldn't even be having this conversation. And he's like, well, what's Labour's policy? To be fair,
that's not an answer.
At this point in time, bills are set to rise by £700. Labour have said, well, we'll give you £600, £100 off, but it's a lot better than what the Tories are offering. And I think, if everyone was given £600 to pay their bills this year, it would be quite unlikely that many people couldn't pay them. So I felt like that was pretty legit. I mean, also from a electoral perspective, they do want to get elected. There's no shame in that. I think having this simple policy that everyone can understand, there's going to be a windfall tax on the energy companies. That's where the money's going to come from. These are the bad guys. Great. It's going to go straight into your pocket to help you pay your bills right now. To me, that, is not a blueprint for the future, but it is a policy which you can say, which is uncontroversial. You keep the focus on the governing party because you're not making the news about you. There's not going to be a big, BBC explainer about how much will nationalisation actually cost. Everyone's talking about these prices rising. Everyone's talking about people's struggles on the breadline. And Labour have a policy which is we're going to tax these rich guys to give you £600 to cover nearly all of your bills, which is way, way better than the Conservatives. So for me, in terms of electoral positioning, it's not bad. And because basically it's sort of sitting on the fence, I don't see it as a particular betrayal in any way. Obviously, he promised some stuff in his 10 pledges, which he doesn't seem to be following through on now. But we've talked enough about that in the past, I think.
You're making so much sense, but then I disagree with a lot as well. So I agree, he doesn't need to say, we're going to nationalise everything. I agree with you. You don't need to say that. I agree with you. You can say the less you promise, the better. I agree with you. But what he's saying with those revolution comments, Michael, is he's actively moving the Overton window to his right. Why would you do that? Why would you? People you don't need to say that. Think of George Lakoff. Don't think of an elephant. What's the first thing you do? Think of an elephant. You don't do that. It's political communications 101. So I just find it's partly the presentation, Michael. So I agree with you actually on the substance of the policy. I don't think it's a terrible policy, right? I think you should do far more. And I think if that's all they're offering, it's pissing in the wind, frankly. But I think when you're actively trying to move any sort of political conversation away from the left, and obviously the further left the public goes on this, the more that helps Labour. It doesn't help the Tories, right? If you're triangulating between, look, lots of people want public ownership, and the right of the conversation wants basically, what we're doing right now, right? The £600 saving, then that's great for us. We can kind of sail that as the Overton window shifts left. We can make the most of that. That's clearly not his view of political change and political action. And I think the presentation is just terrible. I think he seems very evasive, and I think he seems like a bullshit artist. You're saying, oh, well, he answered. Oh, no, he didn't answer the question. Should people have their electricity cut off? Just say yes or no. That's all you have to do. And for me, he feels like the worst kind of personality type that you can have in this political moment, because he seems shifty, even when he's doing something which I agree with you. The policy of a tax on profits, windfall profits for big energy companies should be hugely popular. He's overcompensating so much against the populist stuff that it doesn't seem authentic or credible. So I agree with you, Michael. Look, let's not go all out on this. I think some of the stuff on energy is good. I think there's zero on minimum wage, frankly. I think there's zero on a bunch of other stuff. It's okay. And also, I don't agree with you about, well, prices are going to go up 700. This is 600. Those are old numbers, Michael. Those are absolutely old numbers. Believe me, if there is, which seems to now be the case, the issue between European Union countries and Russia with regards to exports of gas, where they're going to have to pay in rubles, and they refuse to do that. Austria and Germany have already triggered early warning mechanisms where they might end up rationing gas. If that happens, £700 is hugely, hugely, hugely optimistic. You know, the Centre for Economics and Business Research predicted half the levels of growth this year that the OBR did and 0% next year. And I think actually even that may be over-optimistic. So again, you've got a Labour Party and Keir Starmer not really adapting to the facts. 6 months ago, this was a very credible policy and a very credible response. I no longer think that's the case.
I mean, it is a regulated market, though. So prices will go up, but for the next 6 months, they're going to stay the same, right? It's going to get worse for people, is what I'm saying. But I don't really see why Keir Starmer, as leader of the opposition, remember he's not prime minister, why he can't be talking about what's going on right now instead of what's going to be going on in 6 months. Don't you think it's fair enough to say that in 6 months he can sort of cross that bridge when he comes to it? If I'm a Labour Party strategist at this point, obviously I'm not, because I'm not that committed to the project at this period in time, but all I'm thinking is we want people to be talking about the fact that their costs are rising. We want people to be blaming the Conservatives, and we want people to think there is an alternative which probably doesn't have many downsides and that I'm not at all scared of. So he's saying, look, this is political. The reason you're struggling to pay your bills is because the Tories have had a pathetic policy offer. True. We would offer you something which is really significant, which would significantly, for the next 6 months, I agree, it doesn't work beyond that, but for the next 6 months, what this would do is make your energy bills manageable. And we're going to do it in a way which no one in their right mind could find scary, because all we're going to do is tax these people. We can point to them. That's where the money's coming from. It's going in your pockets instead. So if I'm a Labour strategist, I'm like, job done. Obviously, if they're in government, you know, I'd want a long-term solution. Governments need to think in the long term. But as an opposition leader, where what you care about is how do people interpret their experience? Do they blame the government? Do they think there is an alternative? I think he's done a pretty decent job on this front. Obviously, he'll have a challenge in 6 months when he's got to come up with a new policy. But for now, it seems to me a reasonable holding position. Again,
I half agree with you, Michael, but he's operating within a certain set of political conditions, which he can also help shape over the longer term. And I think it's one thing, like you say, to be short-term, pragmatic, immediately sort of focused on this particular objective. Yes. At the same time, why would you foreclose the opportunity for the public discussion to move further towards your terrain? It's like Tories saying, you know, we no longer think low taxes are good. They're always going to talk about that. And I think probably another area where we disagree, Michael, is the big difference right now between the Labour Party and the Tory Party is the Tories are saying overtly, we're committed to low taxes. Now, by the way, they're not right now, because taxes are going up, right? Even when they do lower taxes like national insurance in the end, people think they've increased them. You know, so they're getting their messaging very badly wrong. But they've said, we want to reduce the basic rate before the next election from 20 to 19p. And one thing to remember with high inflation is, of course, that VAT tax receipts are much higher, right? So they have tens of billions of pounds in the chest now. I think their plan ahead of 2024, and let's see if they can get that far, because I think this year and next year is very difficult for them to actually navigate in terms of inflation. But the plan is to get there and offer big tax cuts ahead of 2024. And the Tories are a party saying, we favour the market, we want to be low tax, you get to keep more of your money. That's their brand. And they're going to tie every single policy area into that broader strategic message. What's Labour's? We're going to do a one-off windfall tax. Now, okay, short term, I get it, Michael. What's the longer term story going into an election about how Labour govern and the things they'll do for you? People think instinctively, I'm going to vote Tory because I want lower tax. Why are you going to vote Labour?
Well, I mean, they are going to have to answer that question, but in a way they're setting themselves up for it, right? Because I suppose what they're thinking, and I don't think it's completely unreasonable, is that the branding problem that the Labour Party have is that they say you can have nice things, but they don't really believe that you're going to be able to deliver it. So I assume what they're thinking is for the next 2 years, what we're going to try and do is make ourselves seem almost, it's in the way that it's easier for Tories to offer to spend money. When Tories offer to spend money, people are like, oh, sure. I mean, they're not going to bankrupt anyone. They're the Tories. The Labour Party, Keir Starmer, wants to put himself forward as someone, I am someone you can trust with your money and to spend your money and put it in your pockets, because I'm not someone who, when any problem comes around, I just say, oh, we'll spend X billion, we'll spend X billion, we'll spend X billion, which was the position that, the Labour Party got into in 2019.
That's a legitimate criticism for 2019. It's clearly not a legitimate criticism for 2017 because they saw a 9-point swing to them. It's clearly not a criticism for 2015 because Ed Miliband's manifesto was dog shit. It's clearly not a criticism for 2010 because apparently Gordon Brown was the Iron Chancellor, the most successful Chancellor in the post-war era. It's the idea that all of a sudden the electorate thought he was a spendthrift. I think the argument against New Labour in 2010 is he looked bereft of confidence. There was the global financial crisis. They'd been incumbents for 13 years. They weren't going to win. I buy that. So this idea that every time Labour says we're going to spend lots of money, people don't believe it. Yeah, it happened in 2019. By the way, that wasn't the reason people didn't vote Labour. People didn't vote Labour because of Brexit, because of anti-Semitism, because of the way that the media had portrayed Corbyn and so on. The idea that people were ready to vote Labour, but they said, you know what, I just don't think they're going to come good on their policy commitments. Sorry, with regards to the money. I think that's the one election where you can say that, and even then, it wasn't this overwhelming variable. So I think that's not quite true, Michael. And look, we had a politician who's providing these kinds of policy proposals. It was Ed Miliband. In 2015, he got 30% of the popular vote, right? He got less than Jeremy Corbyn in 2 elections. So let's see. But the idea that this kind of incremental way of doing things without carving out your broader strategy. I mean, Tony Blair certainly didn't do that. Tony Blair talked about a windfall tax, and it was very popular here in 1997, but he did it alongside broader messaging around who he was, about transforming the country. We don't see that with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is actually trying to actively foreclose a conversation about transforming the country. He's like, I don't want to transform the country. But Blair didn't do that. So, look, I think you should, we started this, you saying you're not a Labour strategist. My God, Michael, if only you were.